Yeah, so Dorothy's going to start things soon. So yeah, Rima won't be part of this as a panelist, and we've talked about that. So we're not expecting her. And then Abdullahi and Mohammed, I think it depends a bit on their work schedule. So I don't think it's an issue getting in.
Okay, so we'll go with our group that we have currently. My name is Dorothy, for those, because I don't know everybody here, I just know a couple of people like my daughter, and I've met some at a previous meeting that we've had. But my name is Dorothy Larkman. I'm a professor at Nipissing University for the School of Social Work, and I'm taking a position as the interim director for that school. And so that's my academic educational background. I come from the Matachewan First Nation, which is in the middle of kind of northern Ontario, not the far north. It's a semi-remote community, and that's kind of the area that I grew up in. And so in respect to that, because everybody is from all different places on the land here in Canada, that to acknowledge that part of our being has become the practice for most meetings or gatherings that I've become involved with. And so to do that, in thinking about it, I decided that the best way to do it, because I don't know everybody's territories they're in, but I would like to acknowledge the land in that respect by sounding my drum. I'll sound it 4 times, which following our practices is inviting all ancestors to come and sit with us and help us to have a good meeting. As I'm sounding it, I would encourage you to reach out to whomever and however you do to connect with whatever spiritual kind of beliefs that you have, so that we can connect in that manner as well. So this is the acknowledgement of Turtle Island and all of those who have taken care of the lands for us so that we are able to survive and provide today for those that are still coming. So that's the introduction. Manapan Nokwe, Nimki Pineshus Todem, Madajawan Dijiba. That's my Ojibwe name and where I come from in the clan that I'm part of. And so I acknowledge those as well personally when I'm introducing this kind of a gathering. From here, what I'd like to do is have Neil speak about Pegasus and relate what it's all about and kind of why we gathered here today for the connection to Pegasus. So I'll let you take over, Neil.
Okay. Thank you, Dorothy. We're extremely honored to have all of you here, the panelists and the few attendees that we have also who are really knowledgeable, sometimes really tragically too knowledgeable about the issues we're going to talk about. Pegasus began in 2014 as a conference, and it was meant to really bring people together, academics, students, but policy people, advocates and activists, researchers. We had some government people. We've had major people who've won Nobel Peace Prizes. And so we did that every 2 years from 2014, and we were supposed to have one last year that was postponed because of the pandemic. So we viewed global health through the lens of peace and sustainability, thinking about ecological sustainability, and we viewed global health as being both international as well as more regional in the Canadian context. So involving issues with refugees, with Indigenous peoples and people who were in the inner cities, just looking at intersections of issues. After the pandemic, we chose to redevelop ourselves as a new nonprofit, the Pegasus Institute, and to allow us to really more formally talk about things beyond an hour and a half session, whether it be a workshop or a plenary session, and try to take a deeper dive into how we might be able to act on issues. And we hadn't really defined exactly what ACT would be. And in the last year, in the context of Black Lives Matter and certain things around sustainability, as we've developed as an NGO, we've had sessions on refugees, on environmental racism, on climate change. And this is one that is really important to us. Other sessions also in French with colleagues from Francophone Africa, as well as asylum seekers in Montreal. So a breadth of issues, but all linked through thinking about justice and equity and how we can try to bring people together for solutions. So I'm hoping that this particular roundtable that we will have some understanding that that develops amongst us who are in the room, and then anything else is really going to be a bonus. And we're open to taking the ideas forward in whatever way people would like to within what our resource constraints are. We have a number of board members who somewhat represent a bit of a diversity of Canada, with Indigenous leaders, people of color, such as myself. So we probably a little bit more than some organizations. And I'm honored to have many of you here as friends and colleagues that we've worked together. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Neil. Sorry. I think for people to know as well is that I do sit on the board for Pegasus. That's part of the reason why I picked up this responsibility to chair this meeting. And I appreciate everybody coming together, and I hope that you'll have the patience of my having never done this before. And so if there's any anything that you need to say, hey, pay attention here kind of thing, let me know. I think we have the ability to hold the hands up down below. I'm not totally sure, but yeah. So I'll try to pay attention to the screen. So if your hand's up, I can go to you, that kind of thing. So I don't want to ignore anyone by any means. I'm going to go around the table now for you to introduce yourselves in whatever way you choose to. The actual bios of everybody has been, as far as I know, sent to you, so you can see the bios and backgrounds of people. But for other people who are listening in and may participate later on with comments, for them to have a little bit of background of where you're coming from. And so I'll just go around how I see people on my screen, and you can introduce and express what you'd like to about yourself. And it's going to be starting with, hopefully I pronounce it right, Bedri? Okay.
My name is Badri Ahmed. I'm a family doctor, and I work in Scarborough. I work in a community health center. I'm immigrant myself. I came from Ethiopia. I did my medical school in Ethiopia, and I completed my residency here in Canada. As a new immigrant, I went through all the hoops and difficulties as any skilled immigrant go through. And it was a very difficult process. And now I work with in a community health center with people of color, immigrants, newcomers, racialized communities, people with mental health and substance use disorder. We do see a lot of people, and I got involved recently with a subset of community from Ethiopia who have been afflicted with police brutality, mental health, and such issues. And Claire invited me to this great discussion, and I said, let's see what we can learn from this roundtable.
Thank you. Welcome. Next is Claire. Oh, you have to turn your volume on.
I think it's taken me a year to learn to mute and unmute. It's still shaky. Thank you for this invitation, Nia. It's a wonderful opportunity. I do feel that my role is to sort of be in the background and to learn. And I'm a psychiatrist and I work at Mount Sinai Hospital, and there's no exact specialty in psychiatry around trauma, but that's my ecological niche in psychiatry. And I work with newcomers and refugees as well at the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture and at the New Beginnings Clinic at CAMH. And I guess I fell in love with Ethiopia. I've had some dental work, so I'm not having a stroke, but there's a little bit of weirdness going on. I fell in love with Ethiopia, and I was just calculating it well over 40 years ago when I was a physiotherapist working in the countryside. And now we are very proud to have a University of Toronto, Addis Ababa University educational partnership. And we have a bunch of programs graduate programs in medicine, engineering, law, and in other partnerships. And we assist Addis Ababa build capacity and sustainability in their graduate programs. And as a psychiatrist, we also are lucky to work. I work with our Ethiopian colleagues to integrate mental health services into primary health care, whether that's into the health centers or into refugee camps. That's what we've been doing most recently.
Welcome. Sahar?
Hi, I'm from Aleppo, Syria. I'm pediatrician. I worked there for more than 25 years. Then I fled with my family to Canada from the war, which torn my country, and I was treated there. We came here for safety, and we started planning for our future. And still doing that. Yeah.
Welcome. Lawam?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me, Neil. And I look forward to learning from everyone. I'm a psychiatrist in training. I'm a psychiatry resident at the University of Toronto, and I'm very lucky to be working with Dr. Payne very soon. And before I became a psychiatry resident, I worked as a lawyer in Toronto. I was a criminal duty counsel for a few years here in Etobicoke. And my personal background, my parents are immigrants from Ethiopia and Eritrea. I was born and raised in Edmonton. So that's a little bit about my background. I see myself as a lifelong student, and I like to ask questions more than I like to answer them. And so that's the spirit that I hope to bring to this conversation. Thank you.
Welcome. Norm. Oh, no, you got to turn your mic on.
My audio, there we go.
There you go.
All right, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Bedri, I'm a Scarborough boy, so thanks for working where you're working. I've lived in Oshawa now for well over 40 years, but I'm actually a Scarborough. I'm an independent advisor and educator, and I also serve as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Community Safety and Wellbeing, which we launched 5 years ago. I'll tell you, I feel both honored and humbled to be with you this afternoon. Despite my very modest roots in Scarborough, I do know that my life has been faced with privileges that others don't automatically take for granted in Canada. And I'm very alive to that. I've dedicated a lot of my work to social equity. A lot of the work that we've been doing as a team relates to trying to break down barriers and restore trust, or to build trust where it never existed. So I hope to be able to offer those perspectives as we go forward. And my heart is with all of you that have suffered any victimization. Thank you.
Welcome. Matt.
Thank you, Dorothy. Good afternoon, everyone. Equally proud and honored to be a part of this panel and discussion. I am a former chief of police with Waterloo Regional Police Service, and I'll speak about that in a second. Also, the former deputy solicitor general here in the province of Ontario, overseeing policing and community safety and corrections. I left there and now, as part of a number of occupations, if you will, or initiatives that I'm involved in, working internationally on matters of police reform and justice reform, but also with the Monk School of Global Affairs as a distinguished fellow, working alongside Norm and Cal and Dale in our efforts with the Journal of Community Safety and Wellbeing, which proud to see Rachel on board here as well, and one of our newer members as a contributing editor. Personally, I'm also a proud member of the Armenian Canadian community. My grandparents fled the genocides of 1915, fleeing from parts of Turkey as well as Aleppo, Syria, and watched as my grandparents survived. And as a second generation Canadian, very proud of the fact that they chose this country in their efforts to find safety. And it's through my work at Waterloo Regional Police that I came to know Neil, and who I consider a good friend and colleague. Neil and I traveled to El Salvador, where we shared our experiences in collaborative, co-located efforts, all of community wrapping their arms around domestic violence and looking to stem the tide in domestic violence, but also taking that further with what we've done in Ontario around community safety and well-being. And very, very happy to see Neil here today. And we've reacquainted ourselves over the last year or two. And thank you again for inviting us and for being a part of this.
Welcome. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bromberg. I am co-founder of the Reach Out Response Network, which is an advocacy-focused nonprofit that's working with the City of Toronto to really provide support in developing an alternative crisis response service that will be staffed by crisis workers rather than police officers that can respond to folks that are in crisis. I'm also the director of the International Crisis Response Association, which is a service providers network for folks across Canada and the United States who are building or leading similar initiatives in their communities. And my day job that isn't this is working at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, training their staff in trauma-informed de-escalation. And I'm also a law student. So as you can tell, I have a lot of free time and sleep a lot.
Welcome. Mohammed.
Hello, everyone. And I see that this is more or less a GTA affair. I am joining you from Vancouver, and it's still morning here. Good morning, or it's good afternoon for you. I'm joining from you from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. My name is Mohammed. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work, UBC, the University of British Columbia. And my immigrant background is in East Africa. But we have different countries there now, but I have this complicated history of being both a Kenyan, Ethiopian, and a Somali. I come from a border town, and that part of the world was mutilated into different parts by the colonial governments of Italy, British, and the French back in the 1900s. So I still cling to that identity as an East African. I came to know about this program through Dr. Neil, who invited me initially to a very exciting project in Somalia, looking at mental health and peace building, which I'm actually currently still working on that project. And during that time, I came to know Dr. Claire and Abdullahi as well. And I look forward to learning from you and hearing about the exciting thing that's happening. And I also just wanted to mention about, Rachel's work. I would be very interested in what you are doing. I have a research project looking at the intersection of mental health and human rights in 3 different countries. And we are looking into aspects of crisis intervention without policing. So I'll be happy to connect with you down the line and maybe hear about what you're doing. Thank you.
Good, welcome. Next is Cal.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. As my colleagues already said, each of us, I think, is incredibly honored to join in with you today in this conversation. I'm looking forward to lots of learning from each of you through the conversation today. I head up a small nonprofit called the Community Safety Knowledge Alliance, or CSKA. We support governments, the police, and others within the community safety sector, more broadly speaking, in designing, implementing, and evaluating new approaches to community safety. I'm a former, I live in Ottawa. I'm a former assistant commissioner with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I spent a full career with the organization in Alberta and the Northwest Territories, both the Eastern Arctic and the Western side. Back to Alberta, worked here in Ontario, and finished my career heading up the Canadian Police College, which provides advanced and specialized training to police services across Canada and abroad. Over the course of my career, I guess working not only in many First Nation and Inuit communities, but also in cities such as Red Deer, Alberta, and others, came to realize, I guess fairly young, that the tools that we were using as police officers were really inadequate for what we're dealing with in dealing not only with marginalized communities and others, but just generally speaking. And that realization has only grown more evident, as I developed more experience through the course of my career and onwards. So today, working with people like Norm and Matt and Dale, we're really focusing on policing outside of the criminal justice system, focused at that intersection of public health. And so really looking forward to our conversation today. And as I say, a lot of learning, hopefully we'll all take away from it. Thank you.
Rich, welcome. Dale.
Yeah, thanks, Dorothy. And Dale McPhee, like you, Mohammed, I seem to be one of the only ones out of the GTA. I'm from Edmonton. So I'm a police chief here at Edmonton. I'm a proud member of the Métis community out of the Red River in Manitoba. So I was a deputy minister in the government of Saskatchewan in relation to policing and corrections. I also carried the transformational change file as a senior deputy in the government of Saskatchewan, which looked at housing, looked at a lot of the social changes, looked at mental health and some of the things that we could perhaps look at in relation to that. I was a police chief in Prince Albert, high Indigenous First Nations community prior to that. and certainly served about 5 years as co-chair of CCGS and StatsCan as well. So been pretty fortunate. As my colleagues have said, I've been able to travel the world, speak on things about change, not just changing policing, but changing community safety well-being, which is way beyond policing. And actually look at things through integrated partnerships and ability to drive change and actually deliver better outcomes for people, in particular our marginalized and our vulnerable populations that we all serve, that are basically overrepresented because of the risk factors that haven't been dealt with at some point. So looking forward to the discussion. Think just happy to be able to join you and spend some time. I think some of the best ideas is when you just get a bunch of folks together from different backgrounds just to brainstorm about the art of the possible and what could be if we actually thought different. So looking forward to that, Neil. Glad to finally see you and meet you. Anybody that's a friend of Jim's, Jim's pretty integrated with us over here, looking at new ways to do things. So looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person at some point. So thanks, Dorothy.
You're welcome. Anne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Again, I'll reiterate that it is an honor to be here and to be a part of this discussion. It's wonderful to meet everyone, see everyone from across this land. My name's Anne Commando Dubé. I'll start off with Anishinaabe Kwe from Matachewan First Nation. I was reinstated in 2011. Here in Treaty 9 in northeastern Ontario and northern Ontario, very northern Ontario. And I'm also the mayor of the township of Matachewan. My fourth term as council member, I have always been involved in the community. I was 3 terms as a council member over the past 25-30 years, and was elected mayor in 2018. So it's a great privilege to be able to be a part of our economy in that leadership capacity. My other job is I'm a program manager for Beaver House First Nation in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, and program manager. I'm involved with a number of our community members in supporting with any specific services they might need, and referral services, whether it's for housing, mental health, in different capacities. I'm a graduate of Brock University in Aboriginal Adult Education. I have certification there, also certification in child welfare. I'm as you can very well imagine, as a mayor, I'm also on a number of committees in our area, and in committees with other mayors in the district. I'm also a board of director for Missaway Health Clinic in Timmins. I've also had the previous training in trauma-informed care from Indigenous knowledge keepers. And I'm part of this panel to be able to share a story and hopefully to be able to, again, just with change, and once I'm able to share some of my story, you'll be able to understand some of the dynamics of why I feel this is such an important, and I'm very passionate about the change that needs to come with respect to changes within policing, and also with the partnerships and community. I'm also, a part of the committee as a mayor with the local OPP community liaison. I do have relatives in the family that are OPP officers. So it's very passionate. I'm very passionate about being able to share my story when it comes to police shootings. Miigwech, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Welcome, man. Abdullah? I don't know if I pronounced your name correct.
No, you pronounced correct. My name is Abdullahi. I experienced when I was young a civil war in Somalia. I moved to Kenya as a refugee when I was young. I came to Canada. I have a lot of personal experience relating to the police and community violence, all of that. I work many places, but I'm currently a social worker at the Waterloo School District Board. I'm looking forward learning and sharing my experience this diverse group. So thank you.
Good, you're welcome. Asante.
Hey everybody, I'm joining via the phone. You know what? Let me do a little video here. Long story. I'm in my mechanic's office, waiting for my car to get fixed, but very happy to be here. My name is Asante Houghton. I am the co-founder of the Reach Out Response Network with Rachel Bromberg, who's here today, who already spoke a bit about the organization. Also, in my 9-to-5 life, my title is Peer Development and Training Manager at Stella's Place, which is a youth mental health organization in downtown Toronto that works with age 16 to 29 to support young people holistically. What I do there is I organize, curate, design, facilitate, manage peer support training programming. So I train peer supporters. Right now, the big project I'm a part of is called the Community Healing Project in Toronto. It's a citywide project, actually by the city. We work in partnership with the city of Toronto. And the idea is to interrupt cycles of violence by outreaching to young people to help them process trauma that they might have experienced as a result of being exposed to community violence, and then to support those same young people in delivering a 12-week workshop series peer-to-peer in their own communities about trauma and mental health and things of that nature as an attempt to interrupt the cycle of violence before trauma has the impact of causing folks to become involved in more violence. So that's a big thing. I do a variety of other things. I write about mental health and equity and things of that nature. I host a web show called Cypher. Again, it's a mental health show. Doing a variety, so many things, sit on many committees. But overall, for me personally, I was born in Jamaica. I've been in Toronto since I was 2.5 years old, and been here ever since. Now, in my 30s, getting up there, becoming an adult, and for me, it's important that this topic is important. As everyone was talking, it really there's so many stories that resonated. And coming to this country was an escape for me and my family. And though we weren't refugees, it was definitely a situation where my mom, did not want to raise 3 boys in Jamaica because of the level of violence that was happening and still happening in the inner cities that we came from. Came to Toronto, still lived in marginalized environments, low income environments, the projects. So that was still a reality, but not to the same magnitude as it was if we were to be in Jamaica. Overall, I would say most of my life is dedicated to mental health and issues of equity, including community safety, which I think is a big part, and not just community safety in the sense of between community members, but also thinking systemically and how systems impact environments that create the conditions that make people do things to make a community unsafe. So that's a big part of how I like to think and process about these things and these issues. Also to Dr. Claire Payne, I'm saying hi on behalf of my wife, Gabriella, who you might know from CCVT. And she's very excited that, you're on this call and doing this kind of work. So she says hi.
Thank you. Welcome, Asante. And Angel.
Yay.
You're here.
Sorry about that, folks. Okay, Mom, you're gonna have to turn off your mic.
Yes, I just realized that when I hear the.
Your volume needs to go down. Can I talk now? Okay. Hi, welcome. And my bio was sent out, so I'll leave it at that. I'm just happy to be here amongst so many people who seem to be interested in the topic and having a lot of knowledge. Everybody seems to have a lot of knowledge in a lot of areas, so I'm really interested to listen today. And so, miigwech.
Welcome, Angel. And just so people are aware why she's in my house, she's my daughter. So there's the connection there kind of thing. And I would like, even though most people know Neil, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Neil Aria. I'm a family doctor. I work a fair bit with refugees. I've been involved with work on peace and violence and global health over the last many years. It's really nice to meet you all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for being here again. I feel very honored when I listen to everybody's bio and where they're coming from, where you're coming from, in respect to the work that you've done and helping people and working with people. I'd like to, at this time, is set just a few ground rules, which I think everybody has the format. We're going to have some guest speakers. We have 3 of them who will be sharing with us. And that when you're speaking to, I try to keep track of looking at the time, but I may not be the best at doing that, but I will try to do that as the chair to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to share. We will, I will try to do that. If you want to speak or want to have something to share, raise your hand at the bottom where it says raise hand, so I can see it on your screen, and hopefully I'll be able to get you in line kind of thing. And you also know that this is being recorded so that other people can access and hear what we've discussed today. And so we brought everybody here today so that you could discuss how identifying the roots of the lack of trust between racialized, marginalized communities and the ones implementing the systems, such as police officers, mental health workers, those things that are meant to provide protection and mental health services. And so we're trying to create change through this dialogue. When I set up the format, I followed my way of, Indigenous way of going around the circle. And so I begin with kindness, and with kindness is that we're going to be hearing the stories, 3 stories that involve trauma, and they may be difficult for some listeners. And so I would suggest that you please take care of yourself in whatever manner is needed for yourselves to do that. And so the speakers will be providing context of the reasoning for this kind of discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with something at the end, whatever that is from the group. So I'd like to turn it over and let Sahara, if she would speak first for us, and we'll be your generous listeners.
Thank you. I'm Sahar Bahadi, pediatrician from Aleppo, Syria, which is one of the most beautiful and ancient cities of the world, where I spent the most beautiful period of my life, full of hard work, happiness, and success. We fled from the war-torn country to Canada for the safety of my children, where we started planning for the future. On July 27, 2013, my son Sami Yatin experienced a health crisis while on board a Toronto streetcar. The driver evacuated passengers from the vehicle and called the police. Sammy was asking him for help. He wanted him to call his dad because something was going wrong in his head. When the police arrived to an empty streetcar with a scared and confused teenage boy with a 5-centimeter pocket knife, there were approximately 20 of them. None of them made any attempt at de-escalating the situation. In 38 seconds, James Forcello shot Sammy with the first 3 bullets. Sammy collapsed, motionless, soaked in his own blood, paralyzed, and already dead. After 6 seconds, Forcello fired a further 6 more bullets. After 2 rounds of shots were fired, Sergeant Dan Pravica fired taser into Sammy's motionless body. After that, 2 additional police officers got on the streetcar and kicked his body with their feet. That day, I lost my son. And I also lost my daughter. She's not the same anymore. She lives in pain. They were like twins, only a year and a half apart. They had planned their future together. When the court process started, I went every day and watched videos of my son killings many times a day. And I heard how Forcello lawyer, Mr. Peter Brutti, tried to distort my son's character and image. I cannot forget how he emphasized how the final 6 bullets didn't affect my son because he was already dead. I felt that his dignity was further disrespected. For my view in that courtroom, seeing Forcello face every day, there was not an ounce of remorse. I tried to move forward with my life. I studied 12 hours a day for 1 year to my medical equivalency exam, and I passed. I entered a college to become a lab technician, but couldn't complete the course because I could not afford the tuition. I volunteered in Greece and Lebanon with Women and Health Alliance, and I volunteered with COSTI with Dr. Anna Banerjee. In August 2019, I was shocked when I heard from the television that Forcello was out on parole. Me and my family were not there because I learned that my lawyer did not register us with the parole board. Forcello was released from jail in less than 2 years, even though he was convicted with 6.5 years and charged with attempted murder and manslaughter. The system was protecting his future, but not Sammy's family. At that time, I felt so much anger and hatred. I had screams inside me, choking me. I felt victimized repeatedly from the police, from the lawyer, from the justice, from everybody. Everybody tried to push me down, push me and my family down. Forcello continued his studies, and he is now working, and he's a free man with a bright future, and I'm paralyzed person with depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychologically and physically damaged. I have a recurrent nightmare that Sammy survived the shooting only to be disfigured and bleeding, closing his eyes ultimately in my arms in hospital, for sale or recovering, and I'm deteriorating. I tried to fight for justice for Sammy and for others. I wanted his death to at least be an instrument for change and to do something for his memory. But the torment and oppression continue, and there has been no movement or support on behalf of the police or justice systems. After 8 years, there was been nothing done to improve the system or help the victim. And so my pain continues. Now, as a result, I'm not recovered, still suffering, didn't get justice for my Sammy. I promised him that I will fight for justice. And even I couldn't find a place as to work in this community in Canada. And now I feel injustice, no equity between the people. Thank you.
Thank you much for sharing, Sahara.
Sharing.
So before we move on to the next person who's going to share, just to take a moment to take a breath to move on to listening to the next story. It's what we're talking about and what we're sharing and what we're hearing can be unsettling. And so to help with that process, just to take this moment between speakers to be able to reorient ourselves again, and so that we don't take away from each person's story in that respect as well. So with that, we will move on to our second speaker, who is Anne. I think are you there, Anne?
Yes, thank you, Dorothy.
Okay.
Yes, and my condolences, Sahar. Always continue and think of you and so many other families across this land that will, continue to live with unanswered questions, but finding a way to find that peace and understanding of some of the things that we can't change that happened, but finding peace and forgiveness in some of the things that we can change. And that's basically the journey that myself and my kids have been on, is looking at what are some of the ways we can take that path of bringing positive change to prevent any more police shootings, and what police need also within every one of their detachments to find ways to de-escalate and prevent police shootings. I know. So in saying that, on April the 9th of 2020, I'm a mother of four. A daughter that's 45, a son that was 42, a son that's 36, and a son that's 31, and a grandmother of 7. A proud grandmother of 7, and a proud mother. So on April the 9th of 2020, I can't say I knew about his death on April the 9th, 2020. I only knew about his death on April the 10th, the morning of April 10th, 2020, through social media. I was contacted about a police shooting, and that might be my son. So I contacted the police detachment and asked them, who told them who I was, and that I was trying to find some information out about a police shooting and whether it was my son or not. So after speaking with 3 officers there, they told me that, and we live about an hour and 15 minutes away from where my son lived and where the police shooting happened, north of that community. And so anyways, I kept my composure. I did my breathing. Don't overthink. I had to drive, you know. I got our youngest son and explained the news to him, and we drove down to the detachment, where I then contacted my daughter, who was in a community half an hour from there, to meet us at the police station, and my other son, who lived 2 hours away, further north, an hour further north, about the news about their brother. Plus, possible news about them. Like, we had to meet with the police officers. We met with a detective there, and they explained the situation. Now, in the shock, you know, there's a lot of questions we thought we should, we think about now that we should have asked then, but we were in shock, you know, naturally so, about the shooting. And circumstances, a lot of circumstances, you know, we weren't going to know about for months. And we met with the SIU the next day, and they, you know, kind of explained a little bit more about where it happened, not where the exact location, but about the police shooting and the fatal shooting of my son that happened the night before. Not the SIU, not the hospital, and not the police. Nobody called us that night to tell us about the police shooting, and it happened about 9:28 p.m. that Thursday, April the 9th. And you know, it was a night, it was just one of those nights. I was like, I had this insomnia, I couldn't sleep, and you know, it's like a mother, it's like, okay, you know, it's like you sense there's something, but you don't know what it is. And so that's what it was. That's, you know, thinking about, you know, past now, and just some of the circumstances that were going on then. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my son and some of the situations, some of the mental health situations that he had been going through for years. But so we then, you know, with that news, we would wait months, actually 294 days, for the SIU report. And I can't say, you know, that they answered questions, even the detective, you know, as much information as they could give me. I shared information with them about some of the individuals that would come to the house, my son's house, as we were packing stuff up. They were, you know, I don't know who they were. They were coming by, but I can say that the police were very helpful in saying to contact them, you know, about anything. They apparently, there was some items that were being stolen. Our son's house was being invaded the night he died. A lot of that you could tell when we got there to his house the next day. His house was like just like invaded. His every room, and our son was a 42-year-old male, father of two. His daughter's a graduate of Trent in nursing. His son is currently in college for a mechanic, heavy-duty mechanic. But you know, and then the police that day again got a call that there was a grenade in my son's safe. There was a police presence the whole weekend, Easter weekend that we were there. So it was actually on Good Friday last year that we found out about the news. But anyways, when I look back now, I think, why was there such a police presence like every day? That's the situation didn't happen here. And you know, I think about it, it's like there was other things happening that we didn't know about, but they, I think, were there as part of protecting or trying to, you know, to intervene in case something did happen because of some of the concerned persons that were involved with my son at the time. He was shot 3 times in the chest. You know, the call was actually the police call that we were made aware of was invasion of the home that he was in, or break and enter. So we got confused about, we're still confused about why certain calls like that, because these people were all known to each other, right? And apparently these two individuals in the other home where he was at, where the shooting happened, were taking stuff from him out of his house the night before. And this is information that came through us, after the fact. But how could the police have de-escalated the situation? Could they have de-escalation? Using a taser. He was known to the police for driving traffic infractions. He did lose his license. He wasn't able to drive. He had a number of mental health issues, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, panic disorder, and he was taking prescription medications for that. He was also on methadone at the methadone clinic, and so just looking at, the police involvement, and if he's known to the police. So, as far as the situation and the call that was made, we don't know exactly what the call was made, but it had something to do with a break and enter and invasion. But he had, the police returned his coat and his hat. So obviously he didn't have his coat or his hat on or his shoes on. They didn't return his shoes either. So obviously he was there, and there was no invasion or break and enter or what have you, because they were known to each other. I still don't have his cell phone. I still don't have his shoes that he wore. They asked me, but I can say that they were supportive in some of the people. The police were supportive when I did call them. The detectives, said call him anytime, and they were there in an instant when these unidentified individuals came to my son's house while we were packing that Easter weekend. So, I would love to sit down with everyone, anyone involved, about how they could have approached the situation differently. And my son would always call me when there was police involvement. He'd always stand down, and even his kids said that. So we still don't know where his cell phone is, or or his shoes. The SIU completed their investigation, and with all the research that I've done with a lot of SIU investigations on, it always seemed to refer to Police Services Act if the police officer feels threatened. So what are the dynamics of the police officers that were involved? Can you give me like a 2-minute thing, Dot, just so I can finish up before? Looking at some of the dynamics and characteristics or training of police officers, NAPS, Anishinaabe Police, have had no police shootings in Anishinaabe Indigenous Police Force. So in mainstream, there's police shootings, different dynamics. I'm not judging, but I am looking at a way, and our family is too, to look at a way to prevent further police shootings. We've had, the opioid crisis, the COVID crisis, just a number of situations happening in our societies that we all need to consider as community stakeholders in preventing, police shootings. And just over the weekend, I was talking to another mom whose daughter, was an OPP officer and died, unfortunately, in a accident, rifle accident. But anyways, she says to me, "What do you think the difference is, Anne?" I said, "The culture. It's got to be the culture, because they all get the same training, right?" So I appreciate everyone in sharing and listening to our story, but I will continue to advocate for positive support from all stakeholders, including policing, including like mental health workers. We need to have more. Do we need to have more trauma-informed care training in our police officers? I know that I will continue to advocate for positive change while my spirit and my body exist on this land. And until I, end up in spirit world, I'll probably end up still advocating while I'm there. But I appreciate, I think I've shared everything. I tried to understand, keep that communication open with the SIU and the investigator and the support that they had. I've went to sweat lodges for healing. and talking with a traditional healer, talking to counselors as part of my continuance of healing, in addition to the trauma-informed care training that I've already had in supporting our kids through this, not to go down the path of anger and revenge, or, but yes, we say, what about justice? Well, justice comes in many different forms, and it doesn't have to come in an aggressive form, and I really am honored to be able to share this with other individuals across the land who have experienced similar experiences when it comes to traumatic and tragic situations. I will continue to advocate and honor my son's spirit. I say, I put my tobacco down regularly. And when I was in one of the sweat lodges, a name came into the sweat lodge for him, for my son. And it was Bright Star Man. And, he was a man, he was a hunter, he was a fisherman, he was a trapper, he was a graduate of college, he was a miner, he was a hard worker. And, some of the injuries and vehicle accident that he previously had kind of led him to, some of the prescription drugs, and that possibly could be part of that, a number of mental health issues and circumstances that led him down, the path to where he was. And when he did get a settlement from the car accident, it was just like there was these snakes around. They see these people, and they try to, manipulate them. So those are things. Okay, thank you, Dot. So those are things. I thank you for being able to share my story, and I look forward to hearing a lot of feedback from everyone involved across this land on how we can, prevent police shootings and support that moving forward. Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Jan. I appreciate your sharing. I know it's fairly new, still affects, the effects are still there. So I appreciate your sharing in that respect. The other issue, not issue, with Anne sharing is she does come from my community, but she also was part of my family growing up. And so we're more like sisters, I would say, than acquaintances, and so that kind of interaction between us. So I do know and understand, and I know she doesn't mind me waving at her to get her attention, that kind of thing.
No, and I sorry, Dot, I thank you for bringing that up, because I was in foster homes as a child, and a number of foster homes, and and that was kind of due to, some of the colonization and assimilation and 60s scoop and what have you. So I've had a lived experience, and Dorothy and her family, like her mother was part of one of my foster parents growing up, and I am very, I guess, honored to be able to have her as part of that sisterhood. Miigwech.
So in moving along, we do have one more person who is going to share with you, and that happens to be my daughter, Angel. Well, I'll let her tell her story, because I know the story, but I'll let her share that with you. So Angel, would you please take over?
Hi, thank you. So my story is going to be, oh, sorry, Mom, can you turn down? Thank you. Mm-hmm. My story is going to be a little bit different than the two previous, in that my experience is not with the police. It is with an institution. And it does have to do with mental health, and it does have to do with trust. So I'll preface it with that. My boys, I have two beautiful sons. They're teenagers, so we'll leave it at beautiful. They were, we adopted them, and they were in our home before the actual adoption occurred. They were our foster children first, with the intention to adopt. And I was going through a hard time in my life because I had a number of family members who were dying. And so I was mentally not my 100% self. And our youngest was moved into us with us right at the get-go from the hospital, but his older brother came to stay with us a year later. And the CAS at the time made decisions that weren't in his best interest and transitioned him to us in an unhealthy way. And so I had a 2-year-old who was going through abandonment issues and suffering his own little traumas, on top of me trying to deal with the deaths that were surrounding me. And so I wasn't getting much sleep and I was having difficulty. So I reached out to the CAS and I asked for help. I was crying and not able to sleep, and could they please help me? Their immediate response the next day was to come and remove the children from our home and tell us that we were not going to be allowed to adopt the boys. That was the only thing that they said to us, because of my mental state, that they were not going to, they were just going to take the children away from us. And that wasn't okay with me, because that's not what I reached out for help for, from an institution that was supposed to be there to help families. So my initial reaction, it wasn't good, and it wasn't any healthier. But what my spouse and I had to do in order to get the children back is, for whatever reason, Creator put CBC on my spouse's reserve doing interviews regarding foster children and the foster care system. And we reached out to the chief and just said, we're having a problem. So the chief said, CBC's here. Do you want to talk to them? And luckily the reporter actually did a whole story on us. They had us sitting there and we did our whole step-by-step what had happened to us in this process. And when they went to verify the information with the CAS, CAS called us immediately and said that they were not going to verify the information and they would return the children to our care immediately, as long as we agreed not to release the story on the CAS on what had happened to us. And at the time, I was just worried about getting my children back. I wasn't thinking about anybody else. Just I wanted my children back, because to me they were already our children, even though the adoption wasn't finalized yet. So they were our children. I just wanted them back in my home, and we did that. We agreed with the CAS not to release our story. That trauma changed how I look for reaching out for help from people who are supposed to be helping me. It really changed on how I reach out to any institution, whether it be a CAS, be a police officer, be any of those things. It makes me hesitant, because I'm not sure of the reaction I'm going to get on the other end. What I perceive, or my expectations of how people are going to help me, is obviously not going to be the same as what happens on the other end. And so although I have contradiction, I contradict myself when I do this, because I will often tell people, you can't paint everyone with the same brush. You can't paint all the CAS workers the same. You can't paint all the police officers the same, because they don't all react and behave in the same manner. But it doesn't stop me from emotionally having that response of, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't trust them, that they're not going to hurt me more than I'm already hurting. And so that's why I kind of came to this when my mom, Dorothy, and I were talking afterwards, after we had our meeting, about how I could contribute to the conversation of trust and mental health, and institutions that are supposed, like the police, that are supposed to be there to help, is my experience. And I think a part of it too, that although I present as a non-Indigenous person, the CAS was very aware that I'm Indigenous. My spouse is Cree from Northern Ontario and extremely visibly Indigenous. And I think that to some degree played a role in the way that we were responded to when I said that I had an issue. I'd like to believe that it wasn't, but the meetings that transpired around it led me to believe there was more to it than just the moment. And so anyway, to not go any further, that's where I'm at. I don't know how, as an individual, to totally let go of that distrust I have after something like that happened. And I can't imagine for other people who've had police incidents like what we're hearing today, how they would ever regain trust in an institution that's supposed to be there to help us. So that was the other part of the reason I wanted to stay on this roundtable, because I wanted to hear on people's suggestions on how that the system can be fixed, how people can regain trust after so many horrible things can happen. And so miigwech for letting me share my story, and miigwech for sharing today.
Miigwech, Angel. I'm using two screens, so I had to find my mute button. Thank you again for sharing. Obviously, that the story I've heard and no one was around at that during that process and that time too. And so when we're looking at police violence, any kind of violence at all, it's not just the person, one individual that's being affected. It's more than that. It's the family and the extended family that can be affected through that. We've heard about the police violence. We've heard about the how CAS, in this instance, we're not able to provide that protection and mental health services that were thought to be there. And so moving the conversation along is that I wanted to open it up to allow anyone who is on the panel right now to share anything in response to what was shared by our guests, guest speakers, and to relate about the relationships between the systems and providing services to people, whether it be policing, the justice system, mental health, any of those, and how those become intertwined, how they can become very complex in dealing with the situations, and in consideration of the marginalized populations that tend to experience more of this than necessarily other peoples. So I'd like to open it up, and as you're thinking about things and what you'd like to respond to, let me know. I'll leave the chat open in case someone wants to put something into the chat so that I can try and respond to that too. I just have to put the gallery scene on so I can see everybody there. Mm-hmm. So does anybody want to start us off with any kind of discussion, the discussion aspect of this?
I just had a quick comment on what Angel has shared. Thank you, Angel, for sharing your story. In terms of policing, CAS, I believe CAS is the Children Department in Ontario. We call it MCFD here in British Columbia, Ministry of Children and Family Development. And also mental health, the intersection of those three things. When you know, I would call it mothering and mental illness. You know, when a parent, specifically a mother who is, you know, the primary caregiver, comes down with, you know, a mental health crisis or a mental health issue, the first thing that comes into play, the child or the children. I was doing research a few years ago. It's about to be published now on mental health experiences of Somali immigrants or refugees here in Canada. One thing, it was a qualitative study, so I was doing interviews and I was doing field research. And one thing that became apparent is I was interviewing this family who had, there was this mother who had 3 kids. Then she had a mental health crisis. And the first thing that family did was not actually to reach out for mental health care, but to get her a ticket and get out of the country with those kids. straight to Nairobi. Because what was in their mind was if they ever seek help from the mental health system, then the Children's Affairs will come for the kids and take away, put them in a foster care. So yeah, they bypassed the mental health system. A ticket was bought for her. She was such in a serious crisis that even the airline refused to carry her. So they had to actually find a way to get her some psychiatric medications to settle her down so that she can catch the plane in the next day or two, and was in Nairobi. So I actually followed her in Nairobi and interviewed her after 1 year. And, you know, she shared her experience with me. She's doing well right now. But that, you know, that is one aspect of the intersection of these three things that work hand in hand, and where mental health not only becomes a health crisis, but obviously becomes a bigger issue than that, and that causes more harm to the family. And obviously it's understandable that there are kids who can be in serious danger in terms, or, you know, at risk, or who need protection, that have to be removed from their, you know, from their caregivers. And, you know, there's a lot of that has happened and continues to happen. But also there's this intersection where it becomes problematic. Then while I was doing that project, I had actually a family that were also Somali refugees who, you know, a mother who was a single mother who was resettled here from a refugee camp. And, you know, my wife and I were supporting her. And she had, you know, she had some serious mental health issues. And when we realized that that's not something, myself, I work in the mental health system, my wife is a psychiatric nurse as well. So we knew what was going on. It reached a point that we needed to seek help from the hospital. And we got calls from all our relatives saying that, no, you can't take her to hospital because they will take her child away. So while we were having that conversation, and right here in Vancouver, you know, her extended family told her, you know what, if you go to hospital, yes, that kid will go away. So without our knowledge, she booked a flight and she went on Toronto. And so we lost contact with her. You know, I was able to connect with her, but, you know, that's someone who could, both those parents could have really benefited from treatment and from mental health care. But because of that fear and risk of losing their kids, they did not get the help they needed. And I know that she's not doing well. She's in Toronto, just at the radar. But yes, this is something that I realized is a bigger issue that I totally didn't know until, you know, I was doing this research. So Angel, thanks for sharing. And I know there's more about these experiences out there, and I would love to hear more on, and, you know, I don't know what the research is around that. You know, that was a brief qualitative study I did. I think it's probably a bigger issue than I thought.
Good, thank you. Norm?
Thank you, Dorothy. And let me start by saying I can't imagine a more courageous and intimate experience than to share the stories that Sahar and Anne and Angel shared. And I want to thank you for those. Sahar, you talked about how you feel the system has just consistently beaten you down, you and your family. I hope that there's some ways that we can try to lift you up. Angel, thanks for including your story that went to a different place in the system and helps us understand that these things don't only happen in newspaper headlines. And Anne, you introduced the concept of culture. That's where I'd like to jump in. I'll confess my own trauma. This past year through the pandemic, you know, a lot of things changed in our life. I had some fairly significant health issues that I lived through in the last couple of years, and it causes one to reflect. And I'm a senior citizen now, so you're allowed to do that. And I've had a lot of conversations with my wife about whether or not what I'm experiencing is compassion fatigue or just plain fatigue, but it comes to this issue of culture. And having worked for many, many years inside the bureaucracies that make up the system, I can tell you that I've had the privilege, because I work with innovators, and in the work that Dale and Cal and Matt and I have been involved with for over a decade, we see the very best of people in the system who are trying to fix it, to try to make it better, to try to do things. But the part I often don't have an opportunity to talk about is I've seen some of the very worst. I've met some truly awful people in positions of influence, positions of power, positions of authority. And they can be at the very front line, the pointed end of the stick, if you like, or they can be in the executive office, and they can be anywhere in between. And I think this is the issue that I personally am trying to commit myself to in the next few years of my professional work, is how do we get a system, which is essentially a human system, to stop celebrating and amplifying the behavior of the worst while we are somehow failing to build up the culture, the mythology, the legends of the best. And I throw it out there. I realize it's a fairly abstract point of entry into the conversation, but I would encourage us to be thinking on this level. It is a human system, and what we're talking about is a human problem. And why do systems continue to cover up for, promote, justify, defend truly awful behavior by human elements within their own system? Why is their first reflex to say, no, we don't, no, we didn't, no, we aren't? When in fact, we know that there are many of their own colleagues who are on the front lines trying to make a difference because they know, yes, we do. And too often it happens. And the cruelty with which the system can treat families and individuals is something that all of you know too much about. So I want to throw it out there, and I'd love for us to be talking about what are the ways we can do that. I'm trying to do work around inclusion in policing culture. There are days I'm inspired by the conversations I have with police members who are trying to make a more inclusive environment. And there are times where I'm just deeply saddened by the barriers that I see by people who are cynical, dismissive, and have the privilege to perpetuate a power base. I'm wide open to learning any ways that we can crack through that. I think storytelling like this is an absolute essential. And I've talked with others about wanting to move in this direction. I don't think we can address the inequalities and inequities in our cities and in our communities without opening ourselves up to the kind of intimacy that was just shared here. As difficult as it is for those telling the story and those hearing the story, it's the only way we can get to the human element. So thank you. I offer that for what it's worth.
Miigwech, Norman. Cal.
Maybe just picking up on some of what Norm said, and the power of the stories, and echoing Norm's remarks, Saharan and Angel, the power of stories in terms of those within these institutions, people to hear them, are often very powerful. And I'll tell a bit of a story here in a moment, but Norm talked about these institutions, which by their nature in the 21st century, tech-enabled, high demand, high stress environments often, and I'm not making any excuses for it, but it can be dehumanizing in terms of, you think of policing, and Dale will probably pick up on this, when he arrived in Edmonton, one of the key measures is how quickly you get the calls. So members come in, they've got a high caseload, they arrive, and they're already backed up X number of calls. And what's measured is how quickly they get to the calls. But some police services also have got a culture of they have responses, physical responses to every call. So one of the things we're learning is how to, and as a consequence of that, there's so little time. If you take an extra 5 minutes to sit down with the individual that you're meeting with, to talk about their lives, what are the issues that are impacting them, your colleagues on your shift are watching saying, why are you doing that? You got to get on to the next call. So there's systemic issues, and there's certainly the human ones. I'd like to talk about a few of the systemic ones. So in policing, to begin with, you've got policing as part of a criminal justice system. The gateway in the criminal justice system expects that the police are going to feed the system with people coming into it. You'll hear colleagues talk about, gateways out of that and the need to change that culture. So in traditional police culture, sort of mid-1970s, it was an era in which the police were at the center of the community safety model. If we had an issue with safety, we called the police, and citizens were really just passive observers in this particular issue. But what we've given the police is incredible powers of authority and the use of force, and we've heard some examples of that. And you could even look at Angel, your example as an institution that's using that authority and force, in essence, in terms of removing children from you. So the key tools the police have are around authority and the use of force in that more traditional model. Well, now we've moved into an era where it's evident to all of us, certainly around this table, where police need to be part of a public health model, not so much a criminal justice model. The health side, public health side, should come first. And again, colleagues will speak more to that. So as a consequence, the toolkit needs to be much different. Now, in terms of the story I was going to tell, it's about, I was doing some work in one of our Western provinces, looking at the issue of remand and how could we reduce the incidence of people being remanded in custody. And this brought me into contact with a staff sergeant in this particular police service who had been enlightened through stories not unlike, but not to the not as traumatic as the ones we've heard here today, but nonetheless heard stories about different situations which caused him to reflect. And he was promoted to sergeant into the detention unit. And as typical police culture, he went in, and the person he was replacing basically told him, this is what you do. And when the constables bring somebody in to detain, this is basically the pro forma approach you took. And so he fell into the pattern of doing this. And it was only after he heard some individual stories that caused him to step back and reflect on a more human approach was needed. And I've come to know this individual over the last 4 or 5 years. And that experience that he's had has played out now in the work that he does and the leadership he provides to the people he works with, that the human component comes before anything else. Understand their story, understand what's behind it. Solutions to some of this, we've talked about many occasions, is around increasing the diversity in policing, increasing the diversity not only by way of the gender makeup, which is a really important one, and the reflective of the communities we serve and such, but really having people come into these institutions who can be what they are. I was a member of the RCMP for many years, and 1974 the first women came in, and I wasn't very far on in my career, then came to realize that the women that were coming in were expected to behave as or more high testosterone male than the guys were. These are high testosterone organization, the default mechanisms of action. There's a lot of research that we know in terms of public policy and those that deliver these services that women tend to look at longer term, look at root causes of issues, whereas us guys, and again without overgeneralizing, but we can tend to look at what are the offenses we can create and then apply the law to, as opposed to looking at more problem-solving approaches to some of this. And some of the research that I've been reading recently really drives that home. So the solutions are many. The problems that Norm started the conversation around these systemic issues are very real, but that how you treat the one is what can start building towards overcoming some of this, and the kind of leadership that Norm talked about. And police leaders like Dale and Matt both are and have led major police services. They can also talk about some of the limitations or some of the barriers that are inherent in trying to drive this, but I think in the case of all of us around this table, from what I've seen so far, we're all people that want to see things progress and move forward, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
So I'll jump in there, just take it from what Cal and Norm was. So I'll try to give maybe an example of some of the things they've talked about and what we're doing here, and potentially what the future or some potential ideas could be. I think, first of all, just like the others, you know, Sahar, Ann, and Angel, very, very much appreciate that. I think you probably all realize, though, yesterday was also the anniversary date of the death of George Floyd in the US. There's a reason that I mentioned that is change comes with timing, and there's never been a better time to actually drive change. And it's the incidents that have occurred simultaneously. We've got COVID fatigue that's exposed, the vulnerable, weak system that really doesn't work well together. We got a disturbance in the economy, and it's really time for some disruption. But disruption means that we have to be a little bit uncomfortable, and we don't have all the answers, but failure is what we have. So that sets the winds for change. Luam said earlier, I just want to quote what he said, because I think it's really, really important. Sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. So before we jump to the solutions, we better have the question right, and we better not take it in a direction that could be the wrong direction. Let me give you an example of that. I've sat through many missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiries. I've sat through many deaths inquests in various different roles, you know, partnered with First Nations and many others. And I can tell you right now, moving money around doesn't work. It's never worked. It's not a money issue. And I'll tell you why. 80 to 89% of all provincial budgets in this country are spent at 6 ministries. It's right across the country. So there's enough money in there. The social safety net ecosystem in Alberta, in Edmonton, where I police right now, is a $7.5 billion a year spend on a low estimate. We're $462 million of that. Social services is funded 5 to 1 to 7 to 1 policing. We need social workers. That's not the point, but we need to actually rethink and look at the system. And I'll tell you some of the things from a policing perspective. Police calls for service are driven by 2 different elements. And this is based on evidence that comes from StatsCan. Your high users of service are people that probably need to be rehabilitated in jail. Those people are over 50% of recontact the justice system that keep coming through. Your social disorder calls are about 80 to 90% of all police calls for service. When you mix these 2 in jail, they all become high risk. So we need to sort intake better, because when we actually just put people into a justice system, you actually increase your opportunities of failure. So it's that whole sorted intake, and that comes in where Rachel was talking about, or Asante was talking about, etc. I would say that it's the front end services, it's the partnerships, because if you don't get those right, most of this stuff is driven, it's grounded in trauma, it's grounded in mental health and addictions, it's grounded in domestic violence, and you got opportunities in absenteeism in schools, and you've also got opportunities in the employment environment. But having traveled across the world, the things that seem to matter most, and why I came back to policing, is reducing intake so the system can actually work in a functional manner, and making sure every off-ramp work. What's off-ramp? Mental health and addictions, bail remand, mental housing, homeless, child welfare, you know, and the list goes on. Those systems are primarily designed and funded by how many things you put into the system. They're not designed and funded by how many people you actually get out and provide a better opportunity, just like some of the folks have talked about today. So for us, we have to focus on shifting policing, because police is the only, how would you put it? We're not elected. We're all local. Health is provincial and federal. Social services is provincial. Education is provincial, sometimes federal if it's on reserve. So we've restructured ourselves and built a community safety and well-being bureau that comes under the deputy. It's the first ever in policing, I believe, probably worldwide, and it's designed to take patrol and investigative services out of business through partnerships, through measurement, through metrics. It's designed to, it's got programs like HELP, taking the vulnerable people out of the system, Don't let them get in the justice system. Do whatever we can on that first point of contact. It has HUOs, high users of service. How do we off-ramp them effectively out of the justice system? It has a community solutions accelerator partner with data to actually do things for rapid prototype. It's got PAC, police and crisis team members in a car. We just hired 10 social workers. The future is actual partnerships that measure outcomes collectively together. And as Norm mentioned and Cal mentioned, law enforcement, public health, I believe is a really interesting one. We've seconded the first staff sergeant of a police agency to a global agency. One of our staff sergeants works there. If we study this and you think about it from a perspective of public health, which many of you are involved in the space, public health has the ability to engineer, policing has the ability to reverse engineer. Why aren't we using that collective group together? Social determinants of health are the social determinants of justice. They're pretty much exactly the same. Yet we isolate them and we put them in buckets. Somebody asked me in a news conference here about 4 or 5 months ago, Chief, if you were king for a day, what would you do? I said, I'd take public health, mental health and addictions out of the health system, and I'd take police out of the justice system, and I put them in the same ministry, and I put all the not-for-profits in there, because that's your front end of your system. Police control 100% of intake in the justice system, and public health has the ability to avoid a lot of the emergency room visits. But unfortunately, the front ends of the systems and the back ends of the system are in both things. I'll give you an example. In Alberta, mental health and addictions is about 5% of the budget. For public health, it's 5% to 6% of the budget. And it's all budgeted for in health, where the expenditure, most of the expenditures come out in social services, justice, education, and yet there's no basically ability to drive those things together. So bottom line is we need an ecosystem for change, I believe. And honestly, it's all about leadership. It's not about money. The money's in the system, but we all have to feel a bit uncomfortable, do things differently. That's what we're trying to disrupt with Edmonton Police Service right now. And I think there's never been a time to do that, but we're going to need the voices of all of us, because if you can get the front end of the system and the back end of the system aligned, you'll shrink the middle of the system by 20% overnight. And that's been a lot of formulas around on that. But you actually got to take a bold step to try something different. And that's going to be a political discussion, and it's going to have political courage to actually make that happen. But there's never been a better time to drive different ideas and different agendas forward. And I think that comes in partnerships. And those partnerships need to hold each other accountable, and they need to hold each other accountable to measurement and outcomes. But I'll leave it at that. We all probably could talk about this for 3 days.
Yes, yes, yes. And we have a couple of hands up, so thank you very much, and we'll go on. I think Mehdi had his hand up. Where'd he go? I lost him off my screen. Oh, there you are.
Oh, I'm here. Okay. All right. Thank you for the opportunity. By the way, I would like to thank Sahar and Angel for sharing your heartbreaking story. You guys are very, very strong, and I can't imagine what you've been through and what you are going through still. It's not as easy as you try to articulate and share your story about. I remember the story of Sami, and it's a very sad situation, and I hope Sahar and your family will get some sort of justice moving forward. It's the same for Anne and Angel. I'm not an expert, but I want to share my a primary care perspective of mental health and people with mental health being inappropriately or unfairly treated by the authorities and the police, and the difficulties of primary care providers go through. I can give you several examples in primary care setup, and our system is not in good shape to handle people with mental health. For example, I remember seeing a 14-year-old guy with anxiety, extreme anxiety of leaving his house, going to school, and he started having paranoia about people are actually, other students are looking to harm him. And we made the appropriate referral to social worker. I work in a community health center. Yes, we have a social worker. And we also, there is a Shonica clinic where there is a psychiatrist for adolescents. We made those referrals. That referral alone is not enough. That referral alone is not enough. We have to make sure that the system works and this teenager is seen by the appropriate specialist. Unfortunately, he wasn't seen and he tried to harm himself a year later. They disappeared from follow-up, and a year later, he tried to harm himself, and the mom was actually charged for not providing the necessary care. I can't blame the mom. The system actually failed the mom to provide care for her child who was looking for care. So the healthcare, and if there is an adult person, if I make a referral to a psychiatry, there are layers of questions. Oh, is this person involved with the law? They're not going to accept my referral if he's involved with the law. Where am I going to send him if they don't see him? Does he use drugs? They're not going to accept him if he uses a drug. Who is not using marijuana these days? And it is very difficult. Even if they accept, they don't see him any sooner than 3 months. Anything can happen. It's mental health. And the next day, the person might probably jump off a bridge, or any other thing can happen. We see it on the news. It's heartbreaking. There are layers and layers of issues. It's not just the police aspect that we see. The police aspect, it's just my opinion. It's just the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of other issues, and the primary care provider. I'm lucky enough to work in a community health center. I have the time to sit down and talk to my patients and see what kind of resources there are in the community. I can give you another example. I sometimes take residents from UFT, and there was a young woman who came in for leg pain, straightforward, easy. My resident saw her. We discussed the management. It's easy. And I turned to the patient and I said, "How are you doing?" That's it. She's my patient. She knows me. She doesn't know the resident. She started crying. And the resident was scared. He thought he made a mistake or something. He missed something. And I asked him if he can give us some time. And it was a domestic violence a problem. So if we just treat the leg pain and not go further because of lack of time, and in a very busy primary care setup, if there are 10 people waiting for me outside, I would not have time to listen to her story and try to find appropriate resource in the community. Mental health is not just a sore throat. Mental health is not just a simple diabetes or fix the blood pressure and just wash your hand off. No, it's a continuum, and there are lots of other issues, and it's not a simple thing for a primary care provider to find a solution. It's very, very difficult, and really the system needs to change at so many levels, and it needs to be well coordinated. I can give you lots of examples. Yes, as you all said, we might probably need 3 days and not 3 hours. And I don't want to take much time. I hope we can continue such discussions in the future. Thank you.
Good, Rich, thank you. Matt?
Well, thank you, Dorothy. And first of all, like everyone, so moving and so privileged to be a part of this and to hear the strength in the stories and the compassion from Sahar and Anne and Angel. And I'm going to take an attempt at knitting this together because this is so powerful. And would speak for the other three as well. The four of us have been involved in an awful lot of conversations about where policing or community safety is headed, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, the changes that we've all tried to lead from different perspectives. This conversation, the approach that this conversation has taken in addressing a lot of these issues is probably the most one of the most impactful conversations I've been a part of for many, many years. And I'll tell you why. And listening to Angel speak about institution and experiences, as Norm said from the beginning, this is a human services, we are in the human services business. And as Angel described, the institution that she saw in individuals and in people is one of the challenges that we are faced with, because how do we move from that to experiences and expectations when every time we are confronted with or experiencing something from an individual who represents something else? How can we not then brace ourselves for what you've described and tragically some of the outcomes that we've seen? And why this is such a different conversation, it seems, is because this is a conversation that comes from a victims survivor centered conversation, and not the conversation that typically occurs with, as Dale said, the leaders and the voices that we hear who very often want to talk about the dollars and the money. We are in the business, and ought to be in the business, of reducing the demand on policing, not because policing is so bad, but because we know that there are better suited service providers to intervene in matters that are causing the social disorder issues that Cal spoke about, and as many of you have described. What's concerning is leadership today, and many of the voices only talk about the money. And so therefore they look to very quick, I'll call it inch deep solutions, whether those are body worn cameras or other technology enabled advances in the delivery of a service. And yet we aren't having this kind of a conversation that's rooted in experience, rooted in the impact that the James Forcillos and others have tragically bestowed upon us. And yes, there's the leadership that you see in Dale and Norm and Cal and others, but also the leadership in each and every one of you that are doing the work that we all have to collectively do together. This comes from a place where we now know that it's not about who leads, it's about who leads when, and who leads in what capacity. And the police do not need to lead everything. So we need to design a system. Yes, that's what we're doing. That's what we've dedicated our professional lives towards. And we've done that for a number of different reasons, for a number of, it comes from a number of different places in each one of us, but we're all doing the same thing here. And so I don't have answers, but I have an awful lot of energy. And I think this conversation and this group is something that needs to continue, because we are on the precipice of change. If we can convince and get the right momentum behind us, I think we can actually build a human services system that includes police, includes mental health workers, includes social services. It includes all of us working together collaboratively. And I think what struck me most, and I'll end it here, what struck me most about a conversation that some of us had prior to today is this concept of trust. And and Neil shared an article from Al Jazeera the other day about trust and the language that gets used in policing and building this and building that. And I've heard police leaders say, we have to do different, we have to do this. Trust is the precursor to desire. And the challenge that we are faced with today when it comes to policing, it seems, from my humble experiences, is that we moved and shifted away from need or shifted away from desire or want. And we've ended up in the other side of the equation, which means need. And so we've relied on the police because of need, not because we desire them to help. And somehow we need to move this back in the balance where it ought to have been and where it probably was intended to be back in 1829. But thank you, all of you, for sharing what you've shared.
Thank you, Matt. I don't see any other hands up right at the moment, but I wanted to invite the other people who are listening in, if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to make. The chat is open. I believe they're able to access that. I'm not sure if they can access because it's limited to participants on the screen, I believe. I'm not sure if they can be expanded, but they can access through the chat. And with that, I think Cal has something else. Cal, I'll let you speak, and then we're going to move into another kind of shift a bit. Okay.
Perfect. No, just picking up on excellent discussion, and Matt, some really good points you raised there. Just a couple to build on that, and one of them is we know that in the history of and I'll go back to policing because that's kind of what I know best in this in the broader context of community safety and well-being. But we know in the history of policing, as in most government or legislative-led endeavors, the last thing that changes is the policy and the legislation. I mean, that's pretty much true with anything. So in an environment like today, when we hear about these systemic failures, such as the one that Angel described, it's the courage that needs to be instilled in leaders at all levels of these organizations to, in the face of rules or policies that run counter to doing, quote unquote, the right thing. And that's, an objective assessment of all the data one has before and information one has in making a decision. But in the face of doing the right thing versus doing what policy or the rules dictate, we need to encourage in these organizations give the people the latitude to do that and then back them up when they do. And that's typically not the case certainly in many police organizations today. I'd just like to come back and after Sammy's unfortunate death, Bill Blair brought on board Mr. Justice Frank Iacobucci to look at police involved shootings in Toronto. And a particular aspect of Mr. Iacobucci's report that I was really struck by as one who passed life as a police educator and such was in chapter 5 of that. He had two, I think, very pertinent remarks pertinent to our conversation today. And they dealt with the power of culture. And you heard Dale speak a few minutes ago about the majority of what police do day to day in our cities and in our rural areas has very little to do with crime. It has everything to do with social issues, mental health and addictions, antisocial behavior, and all in that package. And what Mr. Iacobucci found, and I think it applies to most cities across Canada, it's not just relevant to the Toronto Police Service, was that the men and women, the vast majority of the men and women at the front lines of the TPS and first line of supervision didn't see that 70 or 80% of what they do every day as having anything to do with their mandates. They perceived their mandates as enforcing and applying the law, not dealing with these social issues. And so that's one ID he brought in. But the next ID he brought in around that was that culture change was needed in policing to prevent future shootings of young men and women like Sami Yatim. But to bring about culture change, the learning parts of these organizations needed to be rallied and put to use. And what he found in that regard was that training would only have the desired effects if it was consistent with the prevailing worldview of those police officers that were taking the training. In other words, and if you use the idea that it was more of a warrior mentality or a law enforcement mentality, if you painted it black and called it tactical, you'd have lots of uptake in terms of the training. But to try and move the culture from one of a warrior mentality to one more of a guardian mentality, working in partnership with other public health institutions, social institutions, that was going to be a really hard move because there really wasn't an appetite at the front lines for that type of training. Mr. Akabuchi's report probably has good application to the kind of institutions that Angel talked about as well, where institutional policies and such prevail and people overworked and all those things. But it's a good pause to step back and reflect as leaders when we're trying to advance a cause. The power and the parochial interests within these organizations are alive and often will prevail at the expense of the greater good. So I thought Mr. Akabuchi's report in that regard was really powerful. So thank you very much, Dot, and I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Cal. Neil, before we go on to other things.
Yeah, I think that I wanted to actually have Claire say something in a minute, because we were talking about things before, about something before the trust. But I also would like us perhaps explicitly to think more about race and racialized populations, because I think we only mentioned that implicitly rather than explicitly. And that's from both ends, from the institutions and how they perceive people, but also people themselves and the experiences that they've been through. We have professionals here who are racialized themselves, and they've described some of their journeys that we don't understand so much. We've talked a little bit about time and that being a constraint within the system, whether it be policing or mental health. And I think we haven't talked as much about some of the fears. And there are fears too, on behalf of somebody working for Family and Children's Services, for instance, having something bad happen to a child and having, and therefore like acting against a parent because they're supposedly for the protection of the child. And police officers, again, they're different fears, not even for their own health. So I hope that in the next phase, we can also start to talk about those things. I think that we're agreed that many things have to change in terms of the system, and I'm glad that we have so many people who are involved with some of those changes. But Dorothy, before we move on, I just wondered, Claire, if you might want to share some of the thoughts that you had mentioned, and then we can move on to the next topic.
Sure.
Thank you, Neil. It's wonderful to sit and listen to everybody's input. I think my thoughts, because of what other people have said, I'm thinking of a slightly different component. There was a sort of really important paper published in the late 90s by a guy called Folletti. And what he did was just ask people if they'd ever had one or more of 7 basic problems as a kid: sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, family member in jail, family member who was depressed or suicidal, family member who had a drug addiction issue, or had they ever witnessed violence against their mother. So the scale was kind of 0 to 7. And it's a very elegant, simple study. And the more you have, doesn't matter, it wasn't counting how many you have in each category, but just if you have had experience of one or more of those categories, you get an ACE score. And over again, the more tick boxes you had, the more likely you were to have significant physical problems and significant mental health issues. And it's like, if we want our public health, if we want our healthcare money to pay off, it's really in supporting families who are stressed and therefore experience one or more of these complicated issues. It's not taking away kids, it's pouring resources into young families where children are at risk. So I think it is, as people have said, it's about turning the system around and knowing where the issues arise, what the issues are and where they arise, and intervening early, not waiting till somebody's 25 and going to their family doctor, or 45 with all the kinds of issues. If you've had a tough childhood, you are more likely to smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol or do these things, which are not good for your health. But even if you don't, it's quite clear that those childhood adverse experiences affect your stress capacity in and of themselves without the bad habits that may accrue. So that's the thing that Neil and I had briefly discussed was, I wonder how, and actually I should ask Bedri, in talking to Bedri and understanding more about one of the Ethiopian communities in Toronto, and perhaps Bedri, you can talk about the kind of secrecy, the enormous shame of having a child who isn't doing brilliantly in school or super well in other spheres. And if a mental health issue comes to a head, that's enormously shameful. So it's kind of pre-trust of the police or the institutions where somebody might reach out to. It's like even acknowledging amongst the family or I don't know, Pedro, if you would like to elaborate that point.
Okay, yeah, here in Toronto, I'm involved with a Harari community. It's a cultural group from Ethiopia. Their number is somewhere from 5,000 to 8,000. We don't have the exact number. The Harari community landed in Canada. Most of them are in GTA area. In the last 30, 40 years. So most of them left Ethiopia during the communist regime and they fled the country for fear because of persecution. There was a Red Terror and civil war, internal conflict. And so most of them, they left between mid-teen years to mid-20s, and they fled on foot to Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, and they landed in Middle East, Europe before they transitioned to North America or Australia or other parts of Europe. So that's how most of them, they came. And so they had so much conflicts in their life and trauma, both psychological and physical traumas during their journey. And when they came here, they went into workforce and they tried to make some living for their family. And the children, they started growing up now. Their children are in their late teens and 20s, and we started seeing some mental health issues, drug use, being involved in gangs and some violence, which is unheard of in this community back home. This is something new. So there is a high degree of secrecy and stigma. Nobody wants to talk about it, and they have a high degree of expectation in their children. They want to see the achievement, their own achievement in their children, because they came here and they went into workforce. That workforce is to make a living. They did not go to school, they did not achieve academically or professionally, and they expect that achievement in their children. And unfortunately, they weren't there for their children while they were growing up, and the children probably, some of them got involved in with the wrong crowd, and we are seeing the consequences now. We have so many young kids and young adults in a wrong way, and we want to try to help them. And the resource is there, even though it's scarce. And now the family and the parents are not ready to talk about it because of stigma, shame, and yeah, there are lots of layers. It's not just the police issue and the outside influence. People have to have some sort of trust because of their previous experience of persecution, trauma, and police brutality. And we also inherit those things to our children. If something happens, stop, don't do this. There is a police, you're gonna be in trouble. So we are making our children fear authority and police excessively. And that also affects our children. There is stigma, there is shame, and nobody wants to talk about it. Yeah, that's how we had some discussion with Dr. Claire, and she's trying to get our community get organized and see what kind of resource and help we can get for the community.
Very much, thank you. Angel, you have your hand?
Yeah, mine's sort of a question / comment. And so the question part goes to those who worked in police services. And my comment sort of just follow up for that. I don't know how much training police officers get in the area of mental health or social welfare issues. Like, I don't know what it is entailed in police training. So I have a little bit of hard time wrapping my mind around that part. But the second piece of that is, despite how much they do have, I am wondering about, in order to get this connection, to sort of deal with the trust and the mental health issues that sort of fall between those places, is that if experienced, and I don't mean newbie, no offense to the newbie police officers, but experienced officers were to go into like social work schools and talk about how social workers could best help them to do their job better and keep people safe, or how social workers could go into police schools and talk about mental health issues and family issues and problem solving, and maybe in those terms bring people with them who have life experience, like Sahar or Anne or myself, to be able to share those life experiences, so that the people who are actually doing the frontline work have some understanding. And I did hear where you were talking, I think it was Matt that was talking about how unless you wrapped it up as a tactical course or something, they might not be interested. But I'm wondering if catching people at the beginning of their careers and putting these stories into their head might make a difference along the way on how they respond to things, so that immediate reaction is not to pull out the guns or to pull out the tasers or to, remove children from the home. The far end of the spectrum, if there's someplace these police officers and workers could learn earlier on to step in and learn that from each other's careers. I understand police, it's not their job to be social workers. That was never the intention originally for police officers. But if they understood each other's roles and jobs and how they might help each other, then we might take away that mistrust in between, and we might take away some of the horrible things that happen when mental health issues sort of get mixed in there too. So that's my sort of comment / question about training.
Excellent question, Angel, and maybe I'll kick it off. You raise a really good point. Most police officers in Canada it's changed a bit over the last maybe 15 or 20 years, but still the majority come in at a relatively young age. With many, it's their, if not their first, it's their second sort of job. And so they progress through a maze of organizational culture and systems and promotion processes and staffing processes and everything over a course of a career, never really stepping outside of that experience to get the kind of cross-pollinated experience that you're talking about. I often say to colleagues, and I guess it was about a year and a half ago at one of our Canadian Chiefs of Police conferences, spoke about if I was to invest $1 in the education or training of any current or future, senior leader in policing, it would not be to send them on a course. It would be to send them to another organization outside of policing to get the very kind of experience that you're talking about there. That's absolutely invaluable. We're talking a lot now about, one province dealing with, shifting the focus of their police academy into a community safety academy, which is more, that cross-pollination. I happen to have from one of our provinces here, and the numbers may not be exact, but I just happened to be working this morning and looking at the police commission's overview of training in that province. And out of a total of 720 hours that go into their police recruit training, 13 hours are devoted to diversity, 21 hours devoted to de-escalation, and 23 hours devoted to mental health issues. Whereas when it comes to criminal law, it's 97 hours and devoted to that. So, there's a whole range of things in there. But just to give you an idea, that needs to shift. The law is important. They need to have a good understanding of that. But I think, to your point, needs to be a better balance there with some of the others. Norm?
Yeah, thanks, Cal and Angel. Thanks for your question. I just want to build on what Cal was saying, and those numbers are actually more generous, Cal, than I expected. In the Journal of Community Safety and Wellbeing, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's in the issue that's coming out in about 2 weeks, our June issue, we have a paper on the deficit of de-escalation training in Canadian policing. So I would commend that to you. This researcher has taken a look at that and built on the observation Cal just made. I know a few years ago, and I was part of, along with Matt, running a national conference on police interactions with persons with mental health. And that was 2014. And at that time, those numbers were somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 hours of actual training or education on mental health issues during the 5-month period that they were at the Ontario Police College. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just astonishing when you put that together with the statistics that Dale was talking about, and that we know full well 80% of police calls for service don't relate to a crime. And in some cities, the frequency with which they do relate to mental health issues is as high as 40 to 60%. And yet, if you tell someone over and over again that their job is law enforcement, they're going to believe you. And that's the foot they're going to lead with. And that's why we see tragedies like Sammy's tragedy. Because if you've been told from the time of your earliest formative development that your job is to lead with the authority of the state, and you've had very little time to learn about why someone presents in crisis and what might be going on in that situation and what other parts of the system could be doing about that. And so I want to pick up on your point, Angel, when you say, well, I realize this is policing, it's not public health. Why isn't it? Policing are an instrument of the public health. And I can't remember if it was Matt or Cal a few minutes ago referred to 1829. That was the concept. This artificial designation of police as a authoritative instrument of the state is a fabrication. It's a fabrication of our post-industrial times, and it can change. We do not have to live with that model. And we're better here in Canada than in the States, where the notion of law enforcement is even more ingrained, but we have way too much of it, and it contaminates our very approach. And to this conversation about leadership that you've heard many of us point to, until leaders begin to recognize and reinforce and amplify those who get the broad mandate those who are prepared to learn how to fulfill the mandate versus amplifying and celebrating the biggest bully in the room, we're not going to make the change. And I've been in too many rooms where that's exactly what I see. And surprisingly, maybe to you, it's not just in policing. The biggest bully might be a health bureaucrat. It might be somebody responsible for reporting on the performance statistics of the mental health system. It might be somebody in child protection, as you encountered, Angel, who is more interested in their self-serving performance reports than they are in actually serving the needs of a family in crisis. And they're out there, and we've got to call them out, and we've got to say, what's the mission? And if we can get to the point that the mission is to that recognize we're all instruments in the public health, then I think we can get there. I want to end with just this, though, and it's to reinforce Angel's question and observation with positive results. Over the past 10 years, I've been privileged, along with others, to launch what we call situation tables. Some of you will know of the Focus Rexdale model. And the situation tables are right across the country. Mohammed, right now, we're heavily involved in British Columbia. And there are now about 18 tables across BC, and the provincial government has fully embraced this idea. These are rapid triage, multi-sector, multidisciplinary tables. They're not designed to be a talking head committee. They're not a planning committee. They literally are frontline practitioners from each of those sectors who come together for 90 minutes in a week, and they say, who's facing crisis? Who is at acute risk? Who do we know that could use help? And let's mobilize the system collectively to get out there and provide those supports. The reason I tell the story is not to sell you on that model, but to tell you that what I've witnessed is every police officer that has become one of those, a member of one of those tables, to Angel's point, has never gone back. They cannot unlearn their connection to the public health system. And they become the greatest ambassadors of recognizing that there is a smarter way and a different way. And the same could be said of every probation worker that's there, every child protection worker that's there, every educator that's there, because they get to realize they have the same mission. The mission is to get to people who the system isn't serving, fill those gaps, and provide the supports. And when they do, amazing things can happen. But we're still talking about a microcosm, and they're still hanging on the fringes of their various organizations. We need to make it more universal. Thanks, Dot.
I have Zahar and Claire who will be speaking in a moment, but I wanted to share what's been posted on the Q&A, which may guide what we'll be expressing right now, because we are moving into the area that I was expecting to move into, and talking about what builds trust and how that can, what's worked and what has not worked, and those kind of things, and moving it into the marginalized population experiences, because we haven't heard a lot of that with our group today. And so I'd like to hear more of that again. But I'd like to relate what Mary Louise has posted in the Q&A. She expresses gratitude, thank you, for sharing your stories and for your ideas. This is not an easy discussion, but an imperative one. One of the panelists made the point about the need for necessary disruption in policing practices. What immediate, very practical steps could be taken that would establish trust in policing services with underserved and vulnerable communities? I'll leave you with that thought for people, but I'm not too sure who had their hand up first, Sahar or Claire, but I'll go with Sahar because she's the first on my screen. Okay.
Okay, I have some questions to all of you. Excuse my simple English, and if I don't express well, why we don't move to action, even for every single case. For example, I have some points. Forcello raised his gun 12 times in a period within 3.5 years. And that's not normal. He has a chief, he has manager. Why don't they notice that? You know, I think he has to go for psychiatric consultation. It's not normal to raise his gun 12 times. This is first. Then why is shoot to kill? This is for you, for the gentleman with us working in the police, you know. Why shoot to kill? For example, the first bullet for Sammy was in his arm. It was enough. Why 9 bullets? And the other thing, what they did for the victim, for me and my family. Me and my daughter, we were at home alone without family, just me and my daughter. You know, we don't have relatives here. We don't have career. We don't have anything. She's very depressed in her room. And I was also in a nervous shock. I asked my family doctor to have appointment with the psychiatrist. She gave me an appointment after 3 months. I'm new in this country. I didn't know about CAMH. I don't know anything. So what the police did for us as a victim? I asked my victim service, I want to learn English just to express myself well. And she said, okay. They didn't do anything for me. They didn't help me to go to psychiatrist. Even my lawyer, he didn't care of my case, you know, he take it as a number. So this doesn't need research, doesn't need studies, you know. It's good to send me somebody from the police. What do you need? What we can do for you? That's it. Thank you.
I forgot to turn my mic on. I apologize. Claire.
Thank you for sharing, Sahar. That's a poignant, and these questions are essential that we listen to and act on. I think what I wanted to say is I'm anxious that mental illness or mental health issues get sort of hived off. And it seems, I think people have said it, this concern that we respond as humans to human distress that Sahar has just mentioned, that mental illness isn't, in a way, one idea is to abandon the idea of mental illness. It's kind of, for these purposes, possibly even irrelevant. What we need to do is think in terms of distress and to respond to distressed individuals as they need to be met and responded to. Because it doesn't really matter if you've got schizophrenia or PTSD or goodness knows, you know, diagnoses are kind of irrelevant. It's for the 3 speakers today. I mean, and Angel, if I can, I mean, you were distressed. You knew you were distressed. You were trying to find help, but nobody met your distress. The same with Sami. He was distressed. He was in a tough spot. And in a way, once we hive off mental health into some kind of other thing, we stop responding to each other, to people in distress as humans, to whether we call it de-escalation or kind of trying to understand what the problem is in a reasonable way. So I guess instead of shouting for somebody to drop their weapon, you say, George, I'm here. We're here. We're here to help. Why don't we sit down and talk about what you need? It's how we expect to be treated when we're distressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That definitely moves the conversation into what we can do or what we would like to see happen from the conversation we've just had. And how do we, how would we move from here? How does the group, any ideas of how to do that? The questions that just came out were obviously very relevant in how we're going to, as a group, even proceed to answer them, and what do we need in place to answer them, those kind of things, people's thoughts, ideas about that, and how that can be established in respect of the issues we've been talking about. I really appreciate Claire bringing out the distress factor, looking at that. To me, that just kind of, I connected with what you were saying, definitely in that respect. But how do we encompass that to ensure that it's being taught or being applied in the right context and right places so that people can utilize that, so we circumvent or at least prevent more of those pieces from happening. Okay, Matt, and then I think Norm.
Thank you, and I hope it's not too awkward, my situation here. My power went out in the middle of our, so I had to switch over to my phone. So I think I caught, some, if not most of everything. I'm good. I want to answer your question, Dorothy, with, it may be an answer, may not. But before that, I just do want to respond in a moment to, or for a second, with what Angel said, and Norm alluded to it as well, about the police officer isn't a social worker or isn't a health practitioner. It's interesting, this notion. I mean, I went to police college 35 years ago, over 35 years ago. One of the moments that has always rung true to me, and it stuck with me the entire time, was our instructor actually telling us the opposite. That when you are out there, you need to think of yourself as a teacher, a parent, a doctor, a social worker, a member of the clergy. Not that you're going to be that, but there are times when that's what the person calling for help thinks they're getting. And to have that in your mind when you're interacting with somebody in distress, in need, in asking for help, in a weakened state. And where this changed along the way, I'm not sure. But to some degree and to some extent, and it speaks to Cal's point around the lack of training in certain areas, we all of a sudden abandoned that notion and micro-focused policing and all that it can represent as law enforcement or some type of enforcer. And that may be one of the areas where we went astray. But to answer your question, I think I would answer it with a caution that in search of this answer that we're looking for and how we can better can instill and earn the trust of racialized communities. How can we interact better as police organizations with people in distress? We along the way have spent a long time, I say we as in policing, we've spent a long time eroding trust. We're not going to all of a sudden recapture it overnight. It needs to be earned. My caution is that we remind ourselves that racism and systemic racism is not just in policing, that the lack of trust in racialized communities doesn't exist just within the service offered by policing. The force, abuse, the mishandling, the lack of outcomes and lack of impact that Dale spoke about is resident among all of these services. Policing, it could be argued, takes up a disproportionate amount of space within all of these systems and systems of systems that we all rely on. And the moment in time we've had task force, we've had inquiries, we've had commissions, we have all sorts of work done to identify that we've got a problem in policing, that we need policing to change. And yet we're still talking about the same thing. And I would suggest respectfully that one of the reasons why policing's been so slow to change is because we gravitate to these, I call them retailed answers that satisfy for a short time. Oh, we've got a racism problem in policing. Let's hire more Black people. Let's hire more racialized people. That's the answer. That's not the answer. You think that we're just going to put body cameras on police officers and all of a sudden change their behavior? That's not going to change their behavior. That's not going to cause them to de-escalate. It's about values. It's about at the root of what those individuals are providing as far as the service is concerned and how they fit within this system that for our conversations and for our professions, we're in the policing profession. That's where we're focused, but we know that we need to do it in partnership with all the other systems. So my caution in addressing change is to not look at simple solutions, these minute little small wins, if you want to call it that, but the gimmicks, the limited training, or we'll just train more people in respecting other people. We'll put a body-worn camera on them. We'll hire more people from racialized communities. That's not going to solve the problem. It has to be more systemic than that and deeper than that. And this is the passion in the work that the four of us are involved in.
Good. Thank you, Matt. Norm?
Yeah, it's funny that Matt went to the same place after Claire spoke, because I had the same reaction. Claire, I think it's brilliant that you're describing what I would paraphrase as a continuum of distress. A far more helpful way to look at the people that we interact with from any part of the system than the kind of retail gimmicks that Matt just talked about, where in the case of policing, you're taught from a very early age the world could be divided into good guys, bad guys, and people who are mentally ill. And those are very narrow buckets that precipitate very narrow responses. And I would guess that the doctors on the screen would recognize similarly overly compartmentalized diagnostics that don't treat the whole person, that don't, the health movement has moved towards a broader wellness spectrum for many decades now. To me, this is where the clue is that if we can stop training our police officers and stop training our health and social workers as though they have a very specific instrumental product to deliver. I handle bad people, you handle sick people, etc. And instead recognize that the system is there to advance the well-being of everyone, and everyone presents on some spectrum of distress. And I think, Neil, this is where I see the conversation coming back to your request about talking about trust amongst racialized populations. We need to recognize that being racially marginalized from childhood is in itself one of those adverse childhood experiences that Claire was talking about earlier, right? I think it was Claire that brought up the ACEs. Being a woman in our society, I have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters. Being a woman in our society puts someone on a spectrum of distress just by the decades of marginalization and mistreatment that they may occur. And everyone who encounters a woman in a situation of some challenge needs to be trauma informed or recognize that that's informing their position, their reaction, just as it would with a racialized person. I also have a gay grandson who lives in the village in Toronto, and I've seen through his eyes and heard from his experience how frightened the LGBTQ community is because of the traumas that they've experienced. I think it's this cartoonish nature by which we say good guys, bad guys, cops roll up, they must be a bad guy. that's what leads to the tragedies that we're hearing about. But if we get to the point where we recognize that policing, healthcare workers, social workers, child protection workers are part of a system to deal with people, all of whom are in various degrees of different life experience, and bring that compassion to care, I think we can get past the similarly cartoonish behaviors that I think have happened that lead to very visible incidents of racism, sexism, whatever it happens to be.
Rich. At this moment in time, because we're getting close to the end, but there are a few people who have not been, whether you choose to or not, not shared. I want to give them the opportunity to express anything or whatever it is their thoughts are on what you've heard so far. And you know who you are, so if you are willing, by all means, put your hand up. And we have one, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone who shared their really difficult stories here today. That it takes a lot to be able to do that. And I personally feel really honored to have been here and to hear your stories. So thank you for that. I guess I'm sort of thinking about what some folks are saying about like police sort of seeing their roles as more holistic and not just very narrowly responding to like crime, criminals, bad guys, that kind of thing. And I think one of the things within that our organization has been working to do, and particularly our international organization supporting other cities in developing alternative crisis response services, is really thinking about what are police for? What are they contributing to a situation? You know, if we're calling 911 and police are showing up and they're providing a service, what service are they providing? Where is the value that they're adding to a situation? And sometimes, you know, in really high acuity situations, the value that they're providing is, you know, the ability to take control over a situation. Or, you know, if there's a crime occurring, the value that they're providing is being able to, you know, police are charged with enforcing criminal law and protecting people who are experiencing victimization in relation to criminal law. But in terms of a mental health crisis, sort of figuring out what are the situations in which police have an additional skill that they can contribute, versus what are the situations in which it's just not, it's not necessary for police to show up. It might be better handled by a peer worker, a crisis worker, case manager, mental health nurse, social worker, or something like that. And then what situations is it appropriate for, you know, where there might be the need for some police skill sets and as well as some mental health nurse skill sets or some peer worker skill sets, and figuring out like what that partnership should look like. Because I think one of the biggest problems or one of the biggest challenges is that sort of we as a society expect police to do everything, and sort of like a mission creep type situation where police are, you know, needing to in some ways play the role of social workers. And to some degree, they're, you know, it's good for police to have training in responding to these kinds of things. It's good for police to have extensive mental health crisis training and suicide intervention training and all of that. But I think about, you know, I've worked at a number of different suicide intervention services for 8 years now. And I've done a lot of suicide specific training. Before I would ever get onto a crisis line, I would have done 60 hours of suicide specific training, as well as like additional training in like responding to different types of calls. Like, for example, like if a kid is reporting abuse or if someone is dealing with domestic violence or something like that. And it just isn't really fair to police officers to expect them to have all of the knowledge that a person who is, you know, worked in suicide intervention field for a long time has had. It's sort of setting everyone up for failure. So obviously, you know, insofar as police training is part of it, insofar as like it's good for police who are interacting with the public to have a good understanding of what people might be going through and how to respond to distress. It's also sort of recognizing, you know, where do police need to be present versus where can other folks potentially take the lead or handle the situation themselves. And that's, part of what our organization is doing and promoting. We're sort of thinking about like, how do we, policing is one part of the system, but it's not the only part of the system. And sometimes the other parts of the system have sort of been overlooked because of the association that lots of people have with mental health crisis and public safety threat. And what we know from 911 call data, for example, is that the majority of these calls that are related to persons in crisis don't actually involve weapons or violence. So sort of doing a better job of discerning those different types of calls and figuring out who should be responding to what. And, if there's a high acuity situation involving weapons, making sure that the people the police who are attending those calls have the training in de-escalating a person in crisis who might have a weapon. But also, if there's we know that Toronto police took 11,000 suicide-related calls last year. So if you have a teenager who's feeling suicidal, maybe that's not a situation where you need an armed officer showing up. Maybe that's a situation that a social worker or a peer worker could handle. So just better discerning those types of situations can be valuable.
Thank you, Rachel. We are running out of time. It's just about 1:45. So I don't mean to cut the conversation off, but from here, I'm not too sure exactly where the group wants to go yet. Perhaps I'm going to suggest this is because of our limited time now, suggest that maybe the email system may work if you email Pegasus. So I'm going to ask Neil of this, whether that's a good idea or not, so that we can connect you to whatever your thoughts are going from here. We talked about that to some degree to answer those questions and those kind of things, but how we actually move forward, it isn't laid out yet, as from what I can see, how the group would like to move forward with that. But we are running out of time, and we know that people have to go to their own places, do what they need to do. So if the group is okay with all of that, we'll move to the closing. If somebody has got something that really needs to be expressed, you have to quickly put up your hand.
Cal here, Dorothy. I've got a quick question. I apologize. I had to skip away there for about 7 minutes. My question is for our three colleagues that shared their personal experiences with tragedy. And it's whether the system, in the various cases, examples that you've provided, to what degree have you been invited in to share your experiences in the case with the police, and in Angel, your case with social service or child services? Has there been any outreach in that regard, or have you had those experiences? No.
Angel saying no. Sahar, have you been invited to speak? No.
So if I could just take a moment, about 3 years ago, and I'll share this, and the public report, we can share it with you. Our organization partnership, we reached out to MAD Canada, and we undertook a study into the social, health, and economic impacts on families of Canadians killed by impaired drivers, to bring that lived experience that those families had experienced. And it looked at, I think, 5 different dimensions. There was, the harms experienced by the families of those that have been killed, their experience with criminal justice system processes, the impact that these experiences had on their faith in the system, the coping and support mechanisms that were available to them, and their sense in terms of what needed to be done to bring about change. And it was very revealing. We did this in partnership. We brought in one lead researcher from the University of Regina that was a lead investigator in this. I'd be happy to share that report with you. And I guess one of the things we were able to do with that was bring these stories through MAD Canada, through our organization, at different conferences involving police officers and people in the providing broader community safety and well-being supports, to bring those stories to them. because, you know, as my colleagues would attest today, this has been very impactful hearing firsthand from the three of you, your experiences. How can we take those kind of stories in different ways? I'm not suggesting it needs to be a report, but anybody that would hear these stories will fundamentally rethink and reimagine how they carry out their day-to-day duties and the kind of courage that might be required on their part to sometimes go against the prevailing cultural winds in their organization. So I just throw that out there.
Okay, thank you very much, Cal. Neil, with that, do you want to make a few comments before we just totally close?
Sure. But before I do that, I want to make sure Abdullahi doesn't want to say anything too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Neil, for inviting me to this meeting. It's great to be here on this table. And a lot of you talk about trust. It's very important. Like I live Kitchener-Waterloo, and the community that I live and the youth I talk to them, if you ask them a lot of questions about police today, they will say, I don't trust police. Even if I have mental health problems, if I have anything, doesn't happen. For example, last summer, there was a Somali gentleman who had mental health issues, and it went to media. He was driving, police stopped him, a few police came, they beat him to all the way, and it went social media. He was arrested and he was released. But up to now, nobody reached out to the community. I think there was one-time meeting, but that's it. When community complained, one-time meeting, but no follow-up, nothing happened. Nobody look after his mental health. He lives in this community. And yes, similar stories have been thrown on Kitchener. There was a lot of Somali youth with police violence and all of that. I don't know if you talk to people in the community, the thing they'll ask you is trust. Do we trust police? Do we trust social services? Do we trust? As a social worker, I always talk about and see what our community will suffer, but they'll push me back and tell me, hey, we don't trust. This chapter is closed. We don't trust. If you have problem or if something happened in our community, we'll never call police. Even some of them, they told me, even if we have a big trouble, we'll not call police. We'll just try to solve our own problem. So that's all my new, I don't know if I may say more, but we're running out of time. Sorry, I was quite old.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that this isn't really the final conversation with all of us. Luam had a couple of things he wanted to add too, and then I'll try to help conclude.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Neil. I'll be very brief. First of all, I want to thank Sahar and Anne and Angel for telling us about what happened, and I'm so grateful to you, and I have immense respect for you. And I've been mostly silent today. I've just been absorbing and really absorbing the depth of this conversation and appreciating it. And my experience as a racialized person who is also a professional in both the legal system, the criminal justice system, as a criminal defense lawyer representing people who had relatively minor offenses, a lot of theft unders, for example, and then going into the psychiatry system as a psychiatrist, I've really seen the impacts of poverty in both the criminal justice and mental health system, and how so much criminalization is driven by poverty, and also so much distress in the mental health system is driven by poverty. And sometimes I find myself sort of, I think it was one of our colleagues said that we use the wrong tools to deal with the issue. And I think that we've often used criminal justice as a way to deal with social problems. We've used, in some cases, certain mental health treatments as a way to deal with social problems. And I'm interested in how we can tackle those underlying social determinants, poverty, economic inequality, systemic racism, how we can tackle those more directly And I think that's a very large political project. It requires looking at the public health approach that's been mentioned. Um, so and just to tie all of my comments together, another aspect of this is community ownership and oversight of our services, whether it's police or mental health or children's aid. I think, and we've heard examples of communities where there may be less violence from these services because of community ownership and oversight of these services. So I think in the spirit of democracy, we need to look at it as a society as to how we can have more community leadership in our services. So I'll leave it there. I've been sort of holding it onto these comments for 3 hours, so I'm just trying to give you a condensed version. But thank you so much for allowing me to speak, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to thank you, thank Dane and Robert for gathering together people and giving us a bit of our format. I should add that we started off with about 3 questions. So the trust, then we had the policy and defunding the police type of things. And then with Dorothy and others, we decided we would break that down in a little bit smaller bit. But we've seen even this bit is actually too large for all of us to swallow in a 3-hour time period. As I was thinking about things, I thought about, like, I've had several COVID deaths in my family in the last month or so. And I was thinking, like, I don't want to be a case. I don't want to be something that people feel bad about. And I was thinking about, like, just in terms of that with more distant things, but for Sahar and Angel and Anne, that you don't want to be an example that people are pointing to, even if there was something that can come out of it. None of us wants to be in that place, and the wounds, I think, as Sahar is saying, it's not just that they aren't healed from one particular thing, but when you're constantly re-victimized. And sometimes you're re-victimized directly when the system continues to treat you badly. Sometimes it brings up past trauma that you've had before. You see something else. And I think that, as everybody's saying, we have to keep the humanity in front of us. So for us with Pegasus, it's more, what could we do? That I know that for some people who are academics, that'd be publish a paper, and for people when we've got people who are editing journals, there is a thing about, would we produce something, or minutes, and each one could be potential directions that we could take, and trying to find funding to increase the conversation among more broadly. And I think that it would be good for all of us to think where we want to take things next, and maybe just share ideas either with us as a group through an email chain, or just sending that to Dorothy or me as individuals. Because as an institute, I think that we have many people who are committed to trying to do something. We don't have a lot in terms of resources, but I think we can try to do something that may help with us as panelists, as well as other people with the Institute. So I don't know if anybody has any specific thoughts now, and specifically also we might want to think, do we just convene together with us and with some people that some of us would suggest in a month or 2 months? So thinking about whether that's a desire out there. But regardless of what we would like to do, and if anybody wants to make any comments now, then they can. But regardless of what we could do, I think each one of us has been touched in many ways by things today, and you have made a difference. Each of you has made a difference to me, and I think to each other. So that's all I can really say, and I'll leave it to Dorothy to close, or if anybody else wants to make any comments before Dorothy closes, to just raise your hand.
Okay. I will close. And so as Neil suggested, you can email either him or myself, those who know whichever ones can respond in that way to what might be our next steps as a group, how people see that. And through Pegasus, we can figure out what where we need to go from here, that kind of thing, or where the group wants to go from here anyway. And so I personally want to thank everybody for sharing. I tried to, was trying not to leave anybody out. And so I appreciate Neil allowing Liam to speak because I didn't see a hand or didn't see anything to do that. So I appreciate that, Neil, I really do. So I always like to try to make space for people when we're sharing in this kind of way to ensure that everybody's voice is heard in some way, shape, or form. And so again, I say miigwech, or thank you for participating, for sharing, and for being very good participants in respect of sharing this space with each other and allowing everyone to do that. Especially thank the guest speakers, Sahara for sharing their story and for sharing hers, and Angel for sharing yours also, to bring that roundness and context to what we're talking about here, and creating and helping to create that change that hopefully will be coming, if not sooner than later. Closing the session, I will sound the drum 4 times again, and what that does in my understanding and my belief system, it releases all of those that we've invited here to go home, which is yourselves as well. So I will just sound it 4 times and we will be complete. Again, miigwech. And I hope to hear from you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.